Hi friends, I'm sure by now you've seen that video where Anthony Morris discusses the final end of God's enemies. Those of you who are not aware who Anthony Morris is, he's one of the 8 leaders of the Jehovah's Witness organization. And these men consider themselves Christ's brothers and God's only channel of communication. Their followers, the indoctrinated, are my family members and my friends, whom I love very, very much. And you know what? These men have so much power in the eyes of those indoctrinated, but their empire has been riddled with scandal. And I often wonder how it's going to end. Over the years since I got out, I have done quite a bit of research, and I was fascinated by how I could have been indoctrinated into this organization. And my research took me to studying other cult leaders. In researching cults, I came to the conclusion that they had a lot of common traits, despite their wide differences in ideologies and goals. I thought it was time that I would share some of this with you, and while I was at it, I decided to infuse a little comparison with these 8 men in New York who consider themselves Christ's brothers and God's only channel of communication. But listen, before we get started, I just wanted to remind you to like this video and subscribe to this channel, my channel, because it really helps me. And also check out my Facebook page because it's easier to reach me there, okay? So let's get started. The first cult leader I'd like to go over is Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She was the leader of the Church Universal and Triumphant. Elizabeth Clare Prophet's thousands of followers considered her a channel for God. Prophet began telling her followers that the world would end in 1919, and she told them that the only safe place to be was at the compound near the cult's headquarters. I'm not going to stay too long on these slides because I have a lot to go over, so please feel free to pause the video and read them if you'd like, but all links will be down in the description of this video. When her prophecies failed, the church began to shrink, and then the considerable assets of the cult were sold off and the organization disintegrated. Now let's compare Prophet with the Jehovah's Witness leaders. The governing body claims to be God's only channel of communication. They predicted or alluded to the world ending many times. Miller, who was the heir to the Jehovah's Witnesses, predicted the world would end in 1844. And then it goes on and on and on from there. And then, of course, we come upon 1975. Do you remember that? I lived through that. It was not a result of a bunch of overzealous brothers, friends. Their publications were filled with this end time prediction, and it went all the way back to the 1960s. We also know that they're selling off their real estate. Their kingdom halls around the world are being sold. All of their Brooklyn properties in New York City were sold. This real estate empire is selling off billions of US dollars worth of real estate. So as you can see here, there's quite a comparison between Elizabeth Clare Prophet and the governing body members. And I'm just using Anthony Morris here to represent all of the governing body members. The next cult leader we're going to move on to is Marshall Applewhite. Marshall Applewhite was the leader of Heaven's Gate, considered himself a prophet. He was considered himself the reincarnated Christ, and his wife Bonnie Nettles declared herself to be God the Father. At another point, they considered themselves to be the 2 witnesses of Revelation. They believed a UFO would enable them to escape the impending doom of this civilization. Any remaining humans would be annihilated. Applewhite said, "Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us." In the end, 39 members committed suicide. He had exclaimed that the plants and the humans would be spaded under the way you would spade under or till the land, meaning that anybody remaining on the earth other than his group of followers would be killed. Just as Applewhite prophesied about the annihilation of all non-believers, so does Watchtower, as you very well know. Their publications and meeting talks are filled with the annihilation of the wicked.
How we look forward to these enemies of Jehovah, our enemies, vanishing like smoke. And frankly, for friends of Jehovah God, how reassuring that they're finally going to be gone. All these despicable enemies destroyed, never, ever to live again. Finally, they're out of the way, especially these despicable apostates who at one point had dedicated their life to God, and then they joined forces with Satan, the devil, the chief apostate of all time. So while we eagerly await Jehovah's bringing his enemies to the end, what a clear warning. We don't want to have any friendship, whether socially or on social networks, with Jehovah's enemies. We're not friends of the world, we're Jehovah's friends. So I thought this would be a nice memory aid to this verse stay in the mind. Sing. As Jehovah's enemies. They're going to vanish like smoke.
Isn't that something? Anyway, as you can see, there's quite a bit of comparison between Marshall Applewhite and what he taught his followers and the governing body members of Jehovah's Witnesses. The next person I'd like to review is Jim Jones. Now, Jim Jones was the one that really frightened me because I felt that what he did to his followers could potentially happen to the Jehovah's Witness organization. And I thought this many, many years ago, and there was TV movies about him, and I couldn't even watch them. I knew the depth of the indoctrination of the Jehovah's Witness organization, and I really prayed that they would not have the same ending as did the followers of Jim Jones. Jones, you see, claimed the world would end. His followers were afraid to discuss their concerns with each other. And former Jehovah's Witnesses, I know that you understand how they felt, because the same is very prevalent within the Jehovah's Witness organization. He promised his followers a utopia after proclaiming himself to be the Messiah. And then in the fall of 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan decided to visit his compound in Guyana. After interviewing Jones and others, he set out to leave with many members who felt they had finally found a way out. This was way too much for Jones because Jones knew that the government would come after them, and he ordered them all to be executed. Fearing retribution from the government, he forced his remaining followers to drink cyanide laced with what was called Flavor Aid, which people often mistake as Kool-Aid. And that's where the term drinking the Kool-Aid comes from. When I was doing research for this, I wanted to compare Watchtower magazines, and I picked a year out of the year 1985. We're just going to see how many magazines in 1985 I was still in show Armageddon on the cover. And I think the first 4 or 5 of the year was all about Armageddon. So Watchtower organization touts Armageddon and the fear of Armageddon. It's very, very prevalent in their teaching. And also they teach a utopia future for their followers. Do you remember this book, Survival into a New Earth? I studied it. I remember it. It was filled with creepy pictures, utopian pictures of the new earth. Look at the table of contents of this book. Chapter 4, the kind of life that awaits survivors. Chapter 10, they will hunger no more. Look at chapter 18, are you loyal to Earth's new king? Well, listen, friends, Earth will not have a new king. Jesus is the king. Jesus was born king. He's not a new king. However, isn't it interesting that the book of Revelation speaks of the Antichrist who will try to rule over mankind on earth as their king? I wonder, subliminally, is that who this chapter is referring to? You see, Jim Jones felt the government would turn on him just as the governing body feel the governments will turn on them. And they are. But they're not turning on them out of persecution. They're turning on them for their crimes. Both of their messages contain Messiah complexes, worldwide annihilation, and a utopian future. Unfortunately, the followers of Jim Jones did not make it. Jim Jones' followers were told that they must obey Jim Jones, even if it did not seem right. And that's what the Jehovah's Witness publishers, followers are told as well. To listen to the governing body, even if it doesn't seem right from a human standpoint. The next cult leader I would like to go over is David Koresh. David Koresh perished with about 80 of his followers when the compound they shared burned to the ground. He claimed that when he was a child, God had spoken to him and said, "You're the chosen one. You are my Messiah." He believed that the group would someday be under attack by the U.S. government. Some of his followers said, "There's nothing that you could do right," is how I felt as a kid. That fear that nothing you can do is going to be good enough. You're raised with just fear. Everywhere is fear. Does that sound familiar? That was what my life was like as a Jehovah's Witness. Isolation was very important to their survival, as contact with the outside world would wake them up. Does this also sound familiar? Here are some more Watchtower publications. Because similar to Koresh, the organization emphasizes separateness from the world, as well as separating from unbelieving family members. That's the only way to keep them in that stronghold. That's the only way to keep that grip of fear and guilt on them. So once again, we see many, many similarities between David Koresh and the governing body members of Jehovah's Witnesses. So there you have it, friends. There is just a little recap of some cult followers and how they compare to the governing body members of Jehovah's Witnesses. You see, I was born in and raised in a cult. I didn't know it when I was in it. And it wasn't until after I got out that I realized that it was a cult. But I survived, and life went on. And rather than having feelings of fear and guilt, I have feelings of peace and love and compassion. Being on the outside, it's really very hard to imagine the awe that the indoctrinated Jehovah's Witnesses have over these men. You see, it wasn't until I cried out to God to reveal his true self to me that I was able to replace the lies of Watchtower that controlled me so much with truth from Scripture. You see, when I got out and lost my worldview, there was this void. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I believed. So I believed many things for the first 20 years after I got out. I was an evolutionist, I was an agnostic, I was an atheist, because I felt that I had turned my back on God, because I was unworthy of his love. But it was the wrong God. It was a false God. The Jehovah Watchtower is a false God, friends. And when you pick up the Bible and you read about who the real God is, and you accept Christ as your Lord and Savior, all the fear and guilt flee. Everything flees. It's replaced with love and compassion. So when I thought that I was unworthy of God's love, I found out that I was greatly loved. I pray that my family and friends, and that all of you, I pray for you and your families and friends to get out of this organization. And that's why I do these videos. I love the Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't know what they're up against. But this organization is crumbling. Their crimes of harboring pedophiles, and now there's this new thing going on about all of the food boxes that they took credit for, saying that it was from Jehovah, that they could have potentially broken some federal regulations to take credit for food boxes that were paid with U.S. tax dollars. is against federal regulation. So what a total mess they're in. Anyway, friends, I pray for the future of the rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses. I pray that more and more and more get out and are safe. Know that I keep you in my prayers, and I hope this video helped you, and I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video today. What do you think, friends? What do you think about the comparisons between these narcissistic cult leaders and the leaders of the Jehovah's Witness organization? Do you see the comparison? Do you believe that they are cult leaders? Let me know. Leave me a comment in the comment section, and I hope you have a great day.